Dag the Evagus Falcha. Hi, hello, and welcome. It is John O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School, and we are here with our weekly check-in and coffee chat. Although I will confess, this isn't coffee. I am both a coffee and a tea drinker, so today the mug is actually full of tea, which kind of works on me in a very different way. Mentally, actually, I have a mental association with tea, which kind of leads us into the thing we're going to talk about today. But the first thing we need to talk about is, of course, the free resources that we have available for you. The whole purpose of all of the stuff that we do here, all of the free content that we send out, is to try and help people and enable people to, empower themselves, to learn for themselves, to explore for themselves. Because I could tell you five different things you never knew before, but if you actually figure those things out as well, explore it along the journey for yourself, then the experience of learning actually helps embed that knowledge differently, and that's why we want to try and help people learn in the right direction. There's been decades of really shit information presented as Irish spirituality or Celtic spirituality, or I think the worst one was this thing called Wicca, which was like an Irish Wicca, which is just horribly appropriative and tone deaf. This individual who created this farcical nonsense was of the opinion that like the Irish used to revere the potato. It was like, there was a goddess of potatoes, and like it was sacred to the Irish, and that's where like the obviously, this person had never read a fucking history book, because potatoes aren't native to Ireland, absolutely at all. They're native to South America. They were introduced into Ireland, but we're not going to get into a history rant. But if you want to avoid bad resources, if you want to kind of steer into, good resources that will set you up and help you on your exploration forward, please pop down into the list there into the description and you will pick up the link to it. It'll get you onto our mailing list as well. We'll let you know about like the end of month classes which are coming up, about like, the other free resources we do on a regular basis. And then the hangouts, the live kind of social hangouts we have once a month as well. So please make sure you're on the mailing list. It's a great way for us to be able to provide more information for you and for you to access that in a regular kind of fashion, as opposed to finding us in the wilds of the internet and then coming across it again. Speaking of that, consider liking and subscribing the video. Not for us, like that's the other thing as well. I'm terrible. Laura is like, we need to market things properly. We need to encourage people in. I'm like, well, no, people need to do it for themselves. People need to own it for themselves. So if you want to get more of this content, if you want to make sure that you're aware of when these things kind of pop up, follow us, like and subscribe, join us on the social media, etc. Because it means that like you'll be with us along the way as we go about it. So, with that said, we need to get back to why tea has a very particular thing that happens in John's brain. And honestly, this isn't about tea. This video is about psychology. Now, I didn't study psychology. Laura did study psychology, but me being around Laura and being fascinated by it, like, I ask all loads of questions and I do kind of ponder around into my own circumstances wherever I can. Who knows, maybe in the future when things are better, I could go and study psychology or, return to higher learning for myself. That is an ideal and a plan, but we're not stable enough just yet to do so. Um, but psychology, the psychology thing I wanted to touch on is the concept of self, and the concept of self as defined in the Jungian architecture of identity. So Carl Jung was a psychologist who actually studied a lot of different people during his lifetime, but he also studied a lot of people with what were said at that time to be mental illnesses, and how, regardless of the the different challenges, there were some fundamental baselines which were always present in any level of identity or any level of association, and that's where we get into the archetypal kind of forms. But in defining an individual and identity, he kind of suggested these ideas of aspects. And there is, oh gosh, I hope I don't get them all wrong, but there is a number of them. There's animus, anima, persona, shadow, and I think there's another one. I have gone it. Obviously, I need to go and look it up. But the ones that I'm looking at today is persona, and then of course a little bit of shadow. So the concept of self is something that is presented to us when we start. Oh, by the way, all of this will link into how this informs, like, a view of self, and then how this actually links into spiritual practice at the end of it. So don't worry, I'm not just leading you off on a little ramble rant here. There's a plan behind this process. But as ever, we need to contextualize. We need to kind of make sure that we have similar language, similar kind of baselines, so that we can understand where we go forward from it. And so the baseline that I'm suggesting is as simple as the tea or the coffee. So it's a choice. I could have made coffee in the mug, but today I made tea. But tea for me fits in a different mental slot than coffee. And it's less about the chemical composition of the liquid and how it like impacts on the biological circumstance, which, is a factor that needs to be considered. Certain times you need a little bit more caffeine and, a little bit less diuretic, and that's why you would choose tea over coffee. Um, but sometimes, the flavor of coffee is just that what your mouth feel wants, what the stomach really like, the gut. You have want that happy of the hot beverage. But for me, tea falls into a different category. My mom was a religious tea drinker, always tea drinking, like, has always been. And my dad was a coffee drinker. So whenever as a kid I would like wanted to do something to show an act of kindness or act of care from my parents, I'd ask them, did they want me to make them a tea or a coffee? And so I'd have one mug in either hand, a tea or a coffee. And I'd have to make it the way they would want it made. Now, I still have this habit. People come into my home. If people like, come in hospitality, I'll ask them if they want tea or coffee, and I'll ask them exactly how they want it because I like them to have the thing that will satisfy their need or their wants, so that they don't go away satisfied. You know, Folks, no, no surprises. I was always working from a place of hospitality and, satisfaction even before I knew the name of the Dagda. But for me, tea, whenever I was not feeling great, whenever I was feeling unwell, either mentally or like physically in some way, shape, or form, I began to associate that with the relationships I have with the people I love, like my mom and my dad. And my dad cares for me in a very specific way, and my mom cares for me in this very specific way. And it's almost like, unbeknownst to myself, if I wanted to feel closer to my dad, I'd have a coffee; closer to my mom, I'd have a cup of tea. And then that began to branch into the awareness of like, well, like, who was the one who looked after me when I was sick, come in and put a cold compress on my head or whatever like that. Or, that was my mom. Who was the one who kind of talked to me about stuff and like, brought me out and about to explore the world and to learn about stuff. That was my dad. So, they had different roles and their influences on my life. Now, but this isn't a trip down John's memory lane, but what it shows is that at an early age, I had built an understanding or a connection to a thing, a function of tea, and how that associated to my mental landscape and my physical landscape as defined by myself. Or was it? It may have been initially defined by my parents. And so this is where we get into the idea of ego and identity. Because when we're a kid, when we're young, we're presented with a lot of things that creates an identity, creates what in the most case becomes our identity for the rest of our lives. Now, in some of it, it is just organic. Like, we're around our family unit, we're around those who have influence on us, those we care about, and that's the impact that has, and that's how we forge our identity. We take all of these disparate pieces of information and it slowly coalesces down into who we become. But also there are things that are put specifically on us when we're a kid. And, John, you're such a good kid, you're always a good kid. So the word good is suddenly that is on John as an identity, you know. It could have been any other ones. Like I literally in school I witnessed people being called troublemakers, mischief makers, bad kids, and suddenly it wasn't just the case that they were a person having a difficult day. They were a bad kid. That was how the teacher defined them. And I noted the difference in attention, the difference in energy, the difference in interaction that these so-called bad kids got, as opposed to, someone, a good kid got, you know, the leeway that was given. Like I was a messer. I was absolutely a messer in school. I just was good enough at all the rest of the stuff not to be classified as a messer. So therefore I wasn't treated as a messer. And that's where the idea of identity really began to take an extra layer as I explore this kind of concept, because we have stuff that is presented to us, and then we have stuff that we begin to identify within ourselves and live into, we live up to. As a kid in a rough area in North Dublin, I wasn't the most physically active. I was a heavy set kid, and I took a lot of beatings because of it. You know, and it was only after I had enough that like I decided to not fight back, but also not just. I decided to just take it and give them no emotional reaction to it. That suddenly a new identity became part of Sully because I was Sully at that point. Tough. Sully was tough in that they'd get no tears out of Sully. And then people just stop hitting me because they'd get no reaction because Sully was tough. So suddenly there's a new identity. But the difference with this one is that I chose it. It was a manifestation of my will not to allow other people to see how they impacted upon me, either with their words, with their like physicality or whatever. I just denied them the response. And so looking back on it now, like, it led to a very difficult problem in later life because I was suppressing emotion instead of expressing emotion. But it was something that really sat with me because I did that on purpose. I chose that. And this is where we link it back to identity and the idea of self as it's constructed. Because a constructed identity, according to Jung, is called a persona. And a persona is pretty much a mask. It is like an identity that is forged by choice to fulfill a particular need in a particular way. And folks, I am really good at personas. I am really good at personas. I have had to be over the years. And this is where we begin to like, and everyone has a persona, okay? It's not a negative thing. It's not oh, you're so fake or anything like that at all. Like, you're not real. Bullshit. All right. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, everyone has a persona. Everyone creates different aspects or shows different facets of their self depending on how, where, who they're interacting with, etc. You probably react differently around your parents than you do around your friends. You probably react differently around or act differently around certain groups of friends. You probably act very differently when you're in your own space at home. You know, this isn't some fallacy, some falseness, how you are a fake person in these environments. This is simply a persona, something that you have even subconsciously created in order to ease your passage through life in those areas, in those ways. But if we are not conscious of this persona, then it's hard to reconcile the other aspects of psychology that come around because personas are normal and natural, and that is shadow. When we talk about like, working with the Irish goddess, the Morrigan, for example, a lot of people associate it with shadow work. And it's like, oh, shadow work. What is shadow work? How do I do shadow work? You know, shadow work is pretty much dealing with the shit that you don't deal with when you live as a persona. Um, Let me kind of clarify that a little bit further, I guess. Shadow work is your shadow sense of self is all of the stuff that you are uncomfortable with about yourself, all of the stuff that you're not proud about yourself, all of the stuff that um is underlying as part of who and what you are, but that you don't acknowledge or connect to or admit to because you're living as a persona. And this is where shadow work is very deep, is very personal, and can only ever be done by you. Like, there's no way in heck any of you will ever be able to understand what John's shadow work is like because all of you ever see is a persona that John presents. And there's going to be different personas in different locations at different times, but it's still this is the face, this is the professional face I present with you and as a community leader, as a bard, but when I need to kind of deal with all of the challenges, nuisances, horrors, messy kind of stuff, guilt, shame, all that kind of stuff behind it, that's shadow work. And that is something that I can only really do myself or in company of a trained psychologist. By the way, counselor, psychiatrist, get counseling. Absolutely. We advocate mental health people is crucially important. You need to be investing in your mental health as much as like in your physical health. And also, if you can't make your own serotonin, store bought is fine. We have no shames about like, needing medical aids in the same way you'd take pain medicine for back pain, which I am at the moment, taking antidepressants for being depressed. It's the same kind of stuff. But it needs to go hand in hand with why, asking the questions, exploring yourself, and exploring some yourself in the support of people who can help you. So we will always say, definitely get counseling, seek out people who you can talk to about it, professional care as you can, because also that means you're not emotion dumping or using your friends or your significant others as counselors unconsensually or non-consensually, because they might not be experts in it. They might not be able to give you good advice. They might not have ever dealt with this kind of stuff for themselves. So seeking professional help, we always advocate for that. Um, but yeah, so in order to survive in our world, we create these personas. I am the good son to Jack and Carmel. Now, I'm a good person because they showed me what my morality. They helped me define my morality. Um, but I'm also John O'Sullivan, independent of Jack and Carmel, and so like, I have to be me and so there's aspects of my own life that is just for me. Now, I am very open with my parents, and I'm very grateful that I have that relationship, but not everyone does. And so there are people out there, and I know them. Some of my friend groups specifically, some people who have kind of come and talked to me about their difficulties where they can't be themselves around their parents. They have to present as the good child. They have to present as the straight child. They have to present as like, a particular specific gender because their parents don't acknowledge them as they are. And all of this is fucking terrible. And so these are almost compelled personas for survival. All the while, the stuff behind the persona is building up. All that stuff that, like, if you think about it this way, there's a light shining on me at the moment. You can see my face. If my face was a mask, right? Literally a mask. If I held that in front of my face, the rest of my face would be in shadow. You'd be then seeing from your perspective a mask, but then behind that is shadow. That is what we talk about by like the sense of identity of shadow. It is then a buildup of all the stuff that is not dealt with within the persona. Now, this is my perspective on it as well. I'm sure like psychologists, psychiatrists, could very much be able to define this a lot better. And I encourage people to explore this for themselves, to absolutely explore psychology, explore, all of these concepts and how they help inform your sense of identity for your sense of self. Because understanding yourself is probably one of the most powerful and positive things you can really do, even the uncomfortable stuff, and in some cases, especially the uncomfortable stuff. So back to the core and the track. Yeah, this concept of shadow work. People are like, oh, it's so difficult, or oh, it's so mystical or magical, or you're so empowered by your shadow work. You're actually empowered by being honest, by being direct about who you are, about the core values, the core stuff, and the stuff that you're not comfortable about, the stuff you're not proud about. And, dealing with that is difficult because it is, you have to be willing to accept a heck of a lot of negative stuff about yourself, and we're not programmed to do that. We're like, most of us, oh well, let's just move on from the bad stuff and like keep going, and like I'm a better person, I made a mistake, we can move on. And absolutely, we make mistakes, we do move on, we should move on. But if we never go back and revisit the mistake, if we then how can we say we fully learned from it? If we never kind of self-assess those difficult, uncomfortable moments, how can we say we fully learned from it and that we won't do it again? And so that's what we talk about when we're dealing with shadow stuff. And the Morrigan being a goddess, like a witch who demands shadow work, or like a dark goddess of shadow stuff. It's not because she's some mystical dark shadow creature of whatever. It's because she is a no nonsense, deal with your fucking shit direct deity. She sees all of it. She is the one who's like, you know what? I just need you to be better. And how you're going to be better is all this shit you have ignored, all this stuff that you haven't dealt with, all this guilt and this shame, all of this stuff that is holding you back, all of these weights that you carry around with yourself, they don't serve you. So deal with that and we can move forward. And so people find it difficult in times, sometimes dealing with the Morrigan in regards to that shadow aspect, because she's very direct. She brooks no bullshit. And as much as we can, to a certain degree, lie to ourselves, there is literally a part of our brain that allows us to push stuff aside, to push information aside, and to kind of then reframe or rework the narrative. The truth of it still applies. And Can't lie to a goddess like the Morrigan. It's just not going to happen. And so the most honest way forward is unfortunately through that dark effort of work. And so that's the whole process of shadow. But the power of persona is also not to be denied and not to be forgotten about, because people say, well, I have, because I've processed my shadow work, I'm now a cleaner, more enlightened, more balanced individual. Absolutely. I'm proud of you. You should be doing that. But don't ignore the power of persona. Absolutely not. Because I was able to redefine my entire existence based on a persona. Now, I'm not talking about the persona I'm presenting with here. This is a closer, realer John than most of my past. But when I was in my mid-teens, my parents moved from the rough area of North Dublin to a different area. And I specifically remember thinking to myself, no one knows me here. No one knows, like, Sully from Finglas. No one knows, like, anything about my past. I get to be an entirely different person here. And it was really brought home to me on the first day of school, because I had to move school, and I went into third year in a new school out in this environment, in this kind of senior cycle of education, high school maybe equivalent with people in America if that needs. Um, but I went into this year, and I was the new person in class, and people like, yeah, okay, and the teacher's like, there's an empty chair, just sit there. And, then, whispers, oh, where are you from? And it's like, and I said, yeah, I'm John. Oh, where'd you come from? Yeah, I came from Finglas, and I saw people react to the mention of this rough place in North County Dublin at the time. And it really kind of opened my mind to that perspective of persona. And so I didn't have to in any way deal with new challenges of being tough, because people knew where I came from, and that was enough for them. In some cases, that was too much for them, and they were afraid of me. But over time, I was able to say, well, I don't have to be shy. I don't have to be quiet. I don't have to, like, hide so that I avoid beatings from where I was in schoolyard stuff, or just, not have to deal with, aggression or bullies. I get to just be me, and I get to be a different type of me. And I consciously created a gregarious persona, someone who would laugh out loud, someone who would, like, talk and tell a joke, someone who'd go out of their way to be solicitous and helpful and respectful, but not shy and not quiet. Someone would kind of put themselves forward for stuff. No matter what the inside John being like, oh, I'm fucking scared of all of this. The persona, the intentional persona I created was like, no, I volunteer. And that changed my life. I lived for a good while as that persona, and it caused a bit of an identity break, because I knew I had this constructed identity, and I knew I had this version of self before the constructed identity. But what I found was that over time, I was able to just integrate it, and living more as the persona, accepting the past for what it was, and processing, the shadow stuff, or the shameful, or the sadness, or the guilt, or any of that kind of other processes as I went along, meant that the persona was now not this separate, um psychotic break entity, not like anything like that at all. It was just another facet, another aspect of myself, of, the true identity that is me. I just decided to make a new facet that would then make me a more fashionable diamond, maybe, you know? So there is a power in a persona, and as long as we're conscious of it, and that's where things kind of where I wanted to lead this. When we talk about dealing with deities in our life, we talk about, like, our spiritual growth and our spiritual pathways. We're not just talking about, I'm a special experience with a god because something spoke to me and I had this external experience out of me. There has to also be that internal work. There has to also be that rationalization, that self-assessment, that kind of judgment, and healthy kind of ego and id balancing effort, so that we're being as real to ourselves as we can, so that when those times come for work with a deity outside of ourselves, or God, guide, guardian, whatever it is, we're doing it from a place of truth, of personal truth, personal empowerment, and that makes us a much more effective individual for ourselves and for our relationships with the gods, guides, and guardians in our world. So with that, that was my really thought and ramble for today. I know a bit rambly, but as I said, the tea, the tea is a self-care thought. Whenever I drink tea, it is an effort for me to trigger those aspects of myself to consider self-care, to consider like, you know what I need? I need just comfort. I need to just take it nice and easy. Tea for me is a relaxant. You know, when I have a nice cup of tea, I just feel a little bit chill. Everything needs to slow down a little bit. If I need to ramp up, I might choose a coffee and get like energized about it, but that's less about the caffeine because there's actually a little bit more caffeine in tea than in coffees. And it's more about how it works for me on a psychological landscape because it's how I choose it to work for me on a psychological landscape. So the last really thought is if we have the power to choose what we remember, what we feel, or how we feel, like, you know, okay, we're going to feel something in any moment, but we choose how we react to it. We choose how we present ourselves to the world. We choose how we present ourselves in our relationships to each other, to our like families, to our friends, to our gods, guides, and guardians. Be conscious of the choice. Be conscious of, you know, those small choices that define who you are because as much as you know we may believe who we are on the inside, like there is external information we need to take on board, but the truth has to be the choice, and it's in those choices that we are as real and as empowered as we can be for who we're supposed to be and who we want to be. And so with that, I will say Gaurav Mila Mahagat, thank you for joining us for today's not a coffee chat, it's a tea chat, but it's still a community chat. It's still our weekly check-in and chat. My t-shirt today says ignorance may be bliss, but it's also no excuse. And so we may be ignorant at times of how we're acting or how stuff is impacting on us because we're living as a persona, but it isn't really an excuse for ignoring the work that we need to do for our sense of self. And so even here, the choice of t-shirt is a choice, an intentional choice to remind me that, you know, I'm just because I'm not aware of some of the shadow aspects of my character or some of the stuff I need to process because I'm acting as a persona, doesn't mean it's an excuse to not spend the time, go figure that out, and be better for myself at the end of the day. So that is the end of our chat there for today. I will say Gaurav Mila Mahagut, thank you very much for coming with us and hanging out. Thank you for being part of our amazing community here at the Irish Pagan School. Do make sure you pop down and pick up that free resource list. It is, again, it's our best foot forward really to say, listen, here's what you really should be reading, and here's the stuff. If it's not on the list, fucking ignore it because either it's appropriated content, badly written content, or the person who has created it is problematic in some way, shape, or form. So, from all of us here at the Irish Pagan School, I will say Gaurav Mila Mahagat. I will say thank you very, very much. And until next time, look after yourself, take care, and slán. Goodbye.